money, and we'll see if that flies in the House. But that is, for us, I think, a win, and whatever the president may have said yesterday about wanting or welcoming a shutdown.
And Mike, following up on what Michael said about Reagan was likable, everything always goes back to Johnny Carson for me. Carson was likable. You could watch him every night. He was invited into your home. He was even invited into your bedroom because there wasn't the sharp edge to him. Again, Trump, there's a lot of flash, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of shock, there's a lot of awe. It lasts a lot shorter than, say, what Reagan's winning personality did.
Johnny Carson didn't wear on you. He didn't exhaust you. Trump does both. He wears on you and he exhausts you. But in the sequel, continue with the sequel metaphor, this is the first sequel that we've seen in presidential politics in quite a while, where the president in the second part series here becomes irrelevant. I mean, the Senate is moving forward without the president, as if he doesn't exist.
Well, it is, and he also has his lawyers saying he's not smart enough to stand toe-to-toe with Bob Mueller. So please, I mean, I saw last night they had Newt Gingrich. They had Newt Gingrich. They had who was a former Nixon guy in South Florida. Come on, Roger Stone.
P.B. Rebozo?
Oh, Roger Stone. Roger Stone, who I hear has like the best Nixon memorabilia.
Find a tattoo on his back.
I don't want to see the tattoo.
And the ability
I would love.
You can see that on the Google machine. Well, I'll show it to you at the break.
I would love to see the memorabilia, but
memorabilia is incredible.
I've heard it's unbelievable.
He's got a Nixon bong that's like right up my alley.
I don't need to see that. But anyway, I lost my train of thought. So these guys were on TV last night, and they were frantic.
They were.
Newt Gingrich, no, he can't go in front of Bob Mueller. That would be the worst idea ever. Where, when you go back to the first thing Newt Gingrich said about Bob Mueller is a man of great integrity. He's a perfect choice for, but they've all figured out that Mueller is so much smarter than Donald Trump. At least they think so. Yeah. I would never say that. But everybody close to him thinks, Mika, that he's too stupid, he's too dishonest to sit down and talk to Bob Mueller. And I don't know, if I were Donald Trump, that would hurt my feelings.
But if you look at the Washington Post, I think tallies, it's 5 lies a day. Can you imagine an hour with Bob Mueller?
Yes.
My God.
The man can't open his mouth without a lie just kind of popping forward.
At some point, I mean, somebody is going to compel him to talk, so they're kicking the can down the road a little bit.
Just say, it is remarkable that you work for somebody and you admit, 4 people admit to the New York Times that he cannot be trusted to talk to an officer of the court without lying.
How would you feel about it if your lawyers were saying that kind of stuff? Not just saying it, but saying it to the New York Times.
Saying it to the New York Times. I would say also, we may be, you'll get this. I don't think anybody else will. Curt Flood.
Yeah.
Right. Free agent.
Curt Flood.
Right. But Major League Baseball didn't want to sue Curt Flood because they didn't want to lose, because then it would open Pandora's box, right?
Right.
It's the same thing here with Donald Trump's lawyers. They can do all of this maneuvering, but at the end of the day, Mueller's going to say, I need a subpoena. It's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. I don't think Trump's lawyers want to lose that, because then that opens the door for the next question, and the next question, and the final question to go to the Supreme Court, which is, can the President of the United States be indicted?
Yeah. The interesting thing about Curt Flood, again, we're going back to metaphors now.
Awesome.
Nobody around Curt Flood was panicked about what Curt Flood was doing. All the players said, yeah, Curt, go ahead. Everyone, nearly everyone around the President of the United States is in a state of panic about the spectacle, the specter of him having to testify before Bob Mueller.
Mika, I've never seen anything like it. They do not trust him to be smart enough to do this.
And just to tell the truth.
Or to tell the truth. I don't know what is worse. Either they think
any interview is a perjury trap. Like, that's the basic deal here. It's like, if you sit with Mueller, it's a perjury trap. You answer questions.
And to go where you began, this is a reality show. And most reality shows, if you think about the most popular ones out there, they do crazy things. Yeah. You basically watch people push the envelope on life and on norms.
Somebody eats a bug.
They coarsen our society. And this reality is doing the same thing, except to our democracy. I mean, at some point, that's the parallel. On Capitol Hill, they're trying to get things done. trying to figure out a deal. Here's Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer compared to the president talking about the potential shutdown.
Senator Schumer and I had a good meeting this morning about Cap's deal and the other issues we've been discussing for some months now. I'm optimistic that very soon we'll be able to reach an agreement.
I'm very pleased to report my meeting with Leader McConnell went very well. We're making real progress on a spending deal that would increase the caps for both military and middle-class priorities on the domestic side that Democrats have been fighting for. I'm very hopeful, very hopeful. Nothing's done yet. There are some outstanding issues.
If we don't change it, let's have a shutdown. We'll do a shutdown, and it's worth it for our country. I'd love to see a shutdown if we don't get this stuff taken care of. If we have to shut it down because the Democrats don't want safety, and unrelated but still related, they don't want to take care of our military, then shut it down. We'll go with another shutdown.
We don't need a government shutdown on this. We really do. I think both sides have learned that a government shutdown was bad. It wasn't good for them, and we do have bipartisan support on these things.
You can say what you want. We're not getting support from the Democrats on this legislation.
In the Senate,
well, we'll see. That's one bill. We have to get that. They are not supporting us.
Can you then clarify, would the president rather see a shutdown or a short-term spending fix this week?
Look, again, we are not advocating for the shutdown. That's the fault of the Democrats not being willing to do their jobs. The president wants a long-term deal, and he wants to get a deal on immigration. And we hope that Democrats will come to the table and get those things done.
So, Casey, the leaders, the Republican and Democratic leaders, both said that they were moving close to a deal. Did I count the president talking about wanting a shutdown 7 or 8 times? Any idea what's going on there? Why did he lead with his chin and let the American people know that he really wanted a government shutdown?
Well, I think there seems to be a minor misunderstanding about exactly what is on the table here and how the government is funded and why it shuts down. I guess I can understand that because Democrats tied immigration to a government shutdown, but they have now untied those two pieces. So to have a government shutdown, the president would, assuming that Congress gets it together on the short-term spending bill, which right now it seems as though it's going to basically find its way through, and then we may have this bigger deal as well. I mean, the president would have to veto that in order to have a government shutdown, and there still would be no deal on immigration. So I was having a little bit of trouble kind of tracking and following. I mean, I think...
So was the president... actually, I won't ask the question. I'll just say what everybody knows. The president was lost yesterday. It was as if he had not been keeping up with what was going on Capitol Hill, what his own staff members were telling him. I mean, what he said was completely disconnected from reality, wasn't it?
It's becoming a common problem with the president and negotiations behind the scenes on the Hill. Congressional leaders think one thing, they go to a meeting maybe with the president, or they watch the president say something in public, and then they take actions based on that. And I think both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have learned that that is unreliable, that those moments and those promises are unreliable, and that they learned later on, whether it's from the podium, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, or it's John Kelly behind closed doors on the Hill, that they simply cannot take action based on what they hear from the president. It's really, I mean, it's quite remarkable. It's become our normal, but it's really quite a remarkable and new and different way of governing and doing things here. At the end of the day on immigration, it's going to come down to, I think, whether Speaker Ryan is confident that whatever he would put on the House floor, President Trump would sign. I think John Kelly is going to give him the indication and the sign on that, and that's what is ultimately going to determine whether we have a solution for the DACA kids. But I think if there's no appetite for a shutdown on Capitol Hill, they're certainly not going to let what the president said yesterday stop them.
No, and it is... really is. Republicans do tell me this is like nothing they've ever seen before. No. Of course, Democrats say it as well, is that the president's completely disconnected by what's going on. His staffers tell him, he's got people on the Hill that are very connected with the negotiations, but he's strangely disconnected. Maybe he's just not paying attention. But I think you can go back in American history and time again, when we've gone through these difficult times, you know, we've just ordered up a military parade. I remember, you know, back when the Red Sox won in 2000.
Countries do that.
Oh, wait. That's the Soviet Union and North Korea, isn't it?
Something like that.
Never
they
mind.
have the marches and, you know,
they all, the heads, yeah.
The
like
leader
that.
watches it, looks at them.
So the president, this is very autocratic, and who would ever guess this president would be prone to
light of all
autocratic
this,
tendencies?
Would want a military parade. Can you imagine if it happens, though, just as you play it out, the images are going to be kind of Peronista, but there will be counter protests, right? This will actually be a thing.
This is.
I mean, it will not go off without incident, right? There will be a.
We just don't do military.
Yes, military parades.
Country.
It's not part of our grand American tradition.
Well, President Trump has asked his top military commanders to plan a military parade in Washington.
You have to tell him.
A Pentagon spokesman confirms that the department is, quote, looking at possible dates.
To tell him no.
Adding that November 11th is Veterans Day, and that's a possibility.
I have a great idea.
Yeah.
Why don't we get, and I'm dead serious, why don't we get Vietnam vets, some Korean vets, get vets from the wars to march, those that have already been to war, perhaps those who are still carrying the scars of those wars. Let them march and on Veterans Day, and we can applaud them. That's something that would be great.
I think that
happens all over the United States now.
No, but I'm saying, why doesn't the president organize that?
Right.
Have the Pentagon organize that, and have the largest veterans parade in American history, where veterans can come together from all of these wars and talk through the challenges they still are facing in peacetime 30, 40 years later.
I think this is more about power and being saluted.
Right.
It's not about actually respecting the sacrifices of people who love our country so much that they would lay their lives on the line.
There is a lot has happened over the past 14 months since Donald Trump was sworn in as president. This is the saddest thing
really
to my mind. I mean, we have been at war for 17 years. We have had nearly 2 decades of sacrifice and sorrow, borne by less than 1% of the American public.
Right.
The American military is the strongest, the proudest, the best in the world. The American military and the American people do not need a parade. We need peace.
Why doesn't the president direct the Pentagon to double down with the VA, John, to make sure that our men and women who are still suffering in Afghanistan, who are suffering from the scars of Afghanistan and from Iraq and from Vietnam, why doesn't he put his focus on us actually as a country taking care of the men and women who have already given their all?
You've got a PTSD crisis from the veterans who served here. We've got suicide, the extraordinary plague of suicides among veterans who served, as Mike said. How about you take the millions, and it will be millions of dollars that's going to go into planning this alleged parade. Take that money, earmark it, and put it into PTSD counseling and services. Use that money to try to actually help the people who have already made these extraordinary sacrifices for the country.
How many suicides per day?
Yes, it's
I know,
horrifying number.
A year or two ago, we were well over 20 suicides a day from our men and women in uniform.
Let's bring in NBC News Pentagon correspondent Hans Nichols. What more can you tell us, Hans, about what's behind this request? Are we misunderstanding it?
No, you have it pretty clearly. The president gave a directive to the Pentagon. If there's one thing we know about the Pentagon, it's that they're a planning organization. And number two, they go ahead and when they get what they perceive to be directives or orders, we can hash out the exact language. If the president of the United States, their commander-in-chief, tells them to do something, they're going to do something. I got to tell you guys, the most surprising aspect of this story to me was the speed with which the Pentagon confirmed the Washington Post scoop. It was about 12 hours ago this story broke in the Post. There's a whole bunch of reporters who are running around trying to match it. Normally, it's very difficult to figure out what was said inside the tank, and that's where this order was given about 2 weeks ago, according to the Post. Pentagon just said, yeah, sure, we're looking at dates. It's out there. It's a request, and we're going to figure out how to do it. So they're a planning organization, and they follow orders, and that has implications across a whole lot of policy arena.
Well, Hans, I would guess, maybe I'm wrong, but Secretary Mattis, a man who was in Iraq from the very beginning, who warned American leaders not to go to Iraq, who warned American leaders against Bremer's de-Baathification, who was there in Fallujah when hell rained down in Fallujah. I would guess that General Mattis would probably be the first person concerned about this. Any chance that we would see pushback from the Secretary?
I think it's unlikely. I think when Secretary Mattis, a former Marine Corps general, came up through, spent almost 40 years in the Marine Corps, when he gets orders, he follows them. Now, the fundamentals of the relationship between Mattis and Trump is that Mattis challenges Trump, right? Those were the rules written when they had their first interview. Mattis challenged him on 3 things: on Russia, on torture, one other issue as well, NATO, I think the importance of NATO. So Mattis has shown a willingness to challenge the president and to disagree with him. It just seems like this is an order that was given from the president. President is clearly likes military parades. He talked about this back in 2011.
Right, but do you think, Hans, it may have been leaked because they want to get this genuinely bad idea out immediately? Yes. So these kind of conversations are had. You say things like this never leak. Well, they got it out fast. Do you think it was to kill it?
My reading of the Pentagon on this is that they don't think it's a bad idea. And it doesn't seem like the White House thinks like it's a bad idea. They think this is celebrating the troops, celebrating America's military might. You remember how impressed President Trump was when he saw that Bastille Day extravaganza when he was in France. It was 2 hours. He's talked about this mess. It's not entirely unprecedented. In 1991, there's a Gulf War parade.
Maybe he should move to France if he likes what they do in France better than here.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if he'd order 1 or 2 baguettes, right? That's the trick when you're living in France. Just always say 2 baguettes, because you can't ever remember when it's or une.
He would eat them with a fork and knife and white gloves.
You know,
but if you've seen how he eats pizza, the president eats pizza.
Oh, I've seen it.
God,
Yeah.
NBC's Hans Nichols.
Hey, Hans, as always.
I've seen how Hans eats pizza too, and it's not pretty.
You know, he doesn't use straight to the mouth.
Nichols says he's a thug.
So, yeah. So
a government shutdown and a military parade.
Yeah, Michael Duffy
doesn't seem like a good mix.
How fascinating! Of all the people that you talk about in the President's Club, Ike and his open suspicions about the military that he served in all of his life. Of course, the famous warning at the end of the presidency about the military-industrial complex. This seems like, of all the presidents you have studied, the one that knew of the horrors of war the most. Dwight Eisenhower would think this was an absolutely horrific, un-American idea.
Yeah, I think he'd say it was over the top and ill-timed. But asking around the Pentagon yesterday, I can tell you that it is quickly confirmed. Hans is right. And I'm beginning to think it might happen. I put more stock, Joe, in your theory that the Pentagon isn't as for it as they might seem. I think they dragged their feet on this since we first heard him ask about it almost 6 months ago. And they finally obviously said, okay, we're looking at dates. That doesn't mean that they're like, you know, or putting tanks on rail cars yet and sending them east. There are no tanks, by the way, anywhere near the city. It might turn out to be something just like with troops. But I think you can no longer imagine that this isn't a possibility. A number of our presidents have been trained in the military. Carter went to Annapolis, Ike, of course. But President Trump, let's not forget, went to military school. He has a love of the uniform. He's surrounded himself with generals. He talks about his generals as if they're his. He obviously likes, as Mika said, being saluted because he imagines that generals will do exactly as he says. In fact, the military is much more clever than that. And they have their own way of slow walking things. And this is, I think they've tried to slow walk this. But now they're past the point of being able to take that tactic. I think there is, the reason it was so easy to confirm is I think they'd like to start a conversation about whether this is a good idea. And they've done that. But they are not passive players here in this conversation at all.
Well, clearly the president was impressed and admired the Bastille Day parade in France. It took 2 hours in length and it was over, and it was impressive. How about if the President of the United States takes 2 hours and walks through Arlington National Cemetery, and he would recognize the responsibilities of what it means to be commander-in-chief, what it means to send young people to war.
I'm not being, this really is not meant as being personal But if he would just visit, the thousands of American soldiers who died in the jungles of Vietnam while he got 5 deferments, even if he would lay a wreath at the in Arlington, the graves of, I think, 20 to 25 American soldiers who died the week that he was graduating from college. I think Americans actually would be far more moved by that than a showy parade that is un-American, that is the sort of thing that autocrats usually do, and that we just don't have a tradition of doing in this country.
50 years ago this week, the Marines were in Hue.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can go back 50 years, and Tet was 50 years ago last week. And yeah, now, and he was, you know, in college.
5 deferments.
I don't think
five deferments. And, you know, even Ike was even suspicious of generals that wore all the medals. What did he call it? Fruit salad?
Yeah.
He had one. He had one. Didn't need to show anything else. He was understated. The man that helped save Europe and Western civilization, who drove the Nazis back across Europe. Donald Trump, I know he doesn't read. His own chief of staff said that the 10-page Democratic memo was too long for him to read. I guess he circled back and said he'll get him to read it. That somebody should give him an oral history of Dwight Eisenhower. And before he starts talking about military parades.
It's got to be a History Channel thing you could watch.
Still ahead on Morning
The Gorilla
Joe.
Channel.
We're actually
That's the History Channel.
kidding.
That Gorilla Channel thing may have been the greatest fake meme in internet history.
This is CNN Breaking News.
I would predict that he would either redact it or refuse to release it.
There's certain changes that are going to have to get made to take out certain sources of methods.
It's very important to clear up the poisonous rhetoric. The best way to do that is to release this memo.
If the president wants a parade, I'm sure the military is trying to put one together.
We have a Napoleon in the making here.
A lot of Americans will take pride in the fact that we honor our military.
This is probably more about his ego than anything else. Who's the rocket man now?
As we get close to agreement, the president steps in and really makes it very difficult.
If anybody's lazy, it's probably Democrats who aren't getting to the table.
They're needlessly callous and disrespectful.
The American people have a heart. The lives of these kids shouldn't be bargained for anything.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your New Day. Up first, President Trump says he would welcome another federal government shutdown if Democrats will not tighten immigration laws. This comes as the House passed a new short-term spending bill. Senate leaders, though, are focused on a 2-year budget deal. While Congress wrestles with funding the government, President Trump says he wants the Pentagon to plan a grand military parade in Washington with tanks and marching soldiers. That could cost taxpayers millions of dollars.
And certainly distract when they just have a day to get this deal done. So while the president is weighing whether to declassify the Democratic rebuttal to that GOP memo alleging surveillance abuses, the White House says the president is going to rely on the recommendations of the FBI and the intelligence community. You have to remember, those are the very leaders whose strong admonitions about the GOP memo the president dismissed out of hand just last week. Plus, we have an exclusive interview with Joe Biden. We haven't really heard the former vice president weigh in on the state of play in Washington, what he makes of this president, and what he makes specifically of the battle over the Dreamers. What deal does he think Democrats should make? We have it all covered. Let's begin with CNN's Abby Phillip live at the White House. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning, Chris. Well, today over in the Senate, it appears that lawmakers are actually close to a bipartisan compromise on the budget and also on immigration. But it is the White House that's stirring up controversy. Both President Trump and his chief of staff, John Kelly, making some controversial comments yesterday that do not appear to be helping matters.
If we don't change it, let's have a shutdown. We'll do a shutdown, and it's worth it for our country. I'd love to see a shutdown. if we don't get this stuff taken care of.
President Trump calling for another shutdown if Democrats don't agree to his immigration demands, despite the fact that at the same time, Senate negotiators were touting bipartisan progress on a budget deal.
I'm optimistic that very soon we'll be able to reach an agreement.
We are closer to an agreement than we have ever been.
Senate negotiators have separated the budget from immigration entirely, a longtime Republican goal. And the current deal includes an increase in defense spending alongside additional domestic spending the Democrats have been calling for. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders left to clean up the president's remarks.
I don't think that we expect the budget deal to include specifics on the immigration reform, but we want to get a deal on that. As we've said, we don't want to hold the government hostage over these items.
Late Tuesday, Senator Lindsey Graham also indicating the Senate may be making progress on immigration.
I felt really bad yesterday. I feel better today. People are, I think we've got a way forward that seems to be fair to everybody. We're back in the ball game now.
This effort coming amid backlash over these remarks from the president's chief of staff about undocumented immigrants who did not sign up for President Obama's Dreamer program, but would be given a potential path to citizenship under the administration's proposal.
The difference between 690 and 1.8 million were the people that some would say were too afraid to sign up, others would say were too lazy to get off their asses, but they didn't sign up.
It's just an offensive comment, though, isn't it, just on its surface?
I think that's something you would have to decide for yourself.
Kelly later doubling down after Democrat Steny Hoyer reportedly pushed back against his remarks in a closed-door meeting. Kelly also telling reporters that the president is not leaning one way or another about releasing the Democratic rebuttal to the GOP memo alleging FBI surveillance abuses.
This is a different memo than the first one. It's lengthier. It's, well, it's different. It will be done in a responsible way. But again, where the first one was very clean relative to sources and methods, my initial cut is this one is a lot less clean.
Kelly adding that ultimately the president is waiting for a recommendation from the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and FBI head Christopher Wray, even though he ignored their concerns about the Republican memo last week. The back and forth coming as CNN learns that President Trump remains eager to speak with Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team, despite concerns from his lawyers. The president is also eager to hold a grand military parade in Washington after praising France's Bastille Day celebration last year.
It was one of the greatest parades I've ever seen.
The Pentagon confirms the president's request, but stresses that the planning process is in its infancy. Well, Chris and Allison, about that parade, it would not be totally unprecedented for something like that to happen. The last time it happened was in 1991 at the end of the Gulf War, but it is pricey. It cost about $8 million, and of course there's still a lot of men and women still in harm's way. This is not by any stretch of the imagination the end of conflict for our armed forces right now, Chris and Allison.
Absolutely, Abby, and we'll get to that momentarily. Thank you very much for all of that reporting. Let's discuss it with CNN political analyst and White House correspondent for the New York Times, Maggie Haberman. Hi, Maggie.
Good morning.
Deja vu all over again. Here we are talking about a government shutdown. Tomorrow at midnight is the deadline, and the president seems to be comfortable this time, maybe he was last time also, playing the shutdown card. Right. So he says that we should do it. He's fine with it.
This is another example, I think, of the president not rowing in the same direction as not only just his party, but his White House. I mean, I think his White House recognizes a shutdown is not good for anybody. His staff recognizes that. Republicans do not want another shutdown. Democrats clearly, I think, do not think they got what they wanted out of the last shutdown. The president has always privately said to people that a shutdown is not necessarily a bad thing for him. It could be a good thing for him. At one point when it looked like the tax bill might not go through, he was talking about it privately to associates as a possible option for getting back at Republicans. So I'm not surprised to hear him say this, but again, it's not in concert with any of the negotiations that have been going on, and progress had been being made toward avoiding a shutdown. This simply doesn't help. It's not dispositive, but it does not help it get there.
So his inability to surrender the me to the we, whether it's on the shutdown and its impact.
Did you just make that up? I've never heard that before.
You said you liked it last time he said it.
We say it all the time because it just gets more and more true. Right. Do you see that at play with this parade thing as well, that he didn't take the time to think about what the metaphor, what the imagery of these kind of parades are, why we dismiss them in other countries, what they would mean here? He just likes a parade. He thinks it would be cool for him to be kind of at the front of one, and that's enough for him.
I don't know that he didn't take the time or it hasn't been explained to him, because remember, he's been wanting to do this since his inauguration, and he was talked out of it. It was scuttled, essentially. There was a huge request for planes and so forth. And then he went to France for Bastille Day for a 2-day trip that he literally decided he wanted to do because they were having a cool-sounding parade. Remember, that cool-sounding parade is not just a testament to France's military. It's a testament to allies that had fought with France. It is a very different type of parade than what seems to be being imagined here. Whether he doesn't know or doesn't care, it's hard to say. I think at this point it's been explained to him why it is both culturally and economically that these parades do not take place in the U.S. other than, because you noted in a previous segment, on main streets, and they're tethered to 4th of July. They're tethered to a celebration of principles, not of a person. We'll see if this actually happens, but the difference now is that it does seem to at least be in motion for how to consider it. It's not just him saying, I'd like one.
So when the commander-in-chief says, I love a parade, bring me a parade.
For me.
For me,
Right.
Then Mattis and the White House, I would imagine, do have to kind of spring into action. I mean, is that what's happening?
I don't know if it's spring. I actually think it might be slow walk into action and look at the various options and then see if there is a way to, if not scuttle it entirely, perhaps redirect it to a smaller goal. This is obviously not the first time that James Mattis has had to deal with a request from the president that he did not feel was meeting certain standards. We'll see where this one ends up.
Right. This lands on Dunford's desk.
That's
Like
right.
He doesn't have enough to deal with, and he'll have to do that. So let me ask you, on DACA, so the chief of staff, who's supposed to be the leavening agent, winds up saying something that is ugly and hurtful. Is it hurtful to the process? Is this part of their spin? Was this intentional, or you think he got caught out there?
No, I don't think this was intentional. I think he was saying what he thinks. I mean, I think that there has always been this misconception that John Kelly, to your point about a leavening influence, that there has been a constant need to confuse the words moderating influence with moderate person around this president. And John Kelly, certainly in his immigration politics, is much closer to the president's public rhetoric than I think a lot of people on Capitol Hill and elsewhere had realized, although if you talk to Democrats on the Hill, they will say, knowing him going back many years, he had always been pretty conservative. Whether this is something that he was just being loose about or intended, and again, I don't think he intended it, I don't think this was an intentional thing. What he said is not helpful to a process. It's going to make it much harder for Democrats and some moderate Republicans in swing districts to be able to go forward working with the White House on certain issues. It's also just a hurtful thing to say, and it is something that plays into among the grosser racist stereotypes of black and brown immigrants, and I just don't see how this is conducive to anything positive.
But it is illuminating. It's illuminating to hear that he thinks that the Dreamers are moochers. I mean, that he opens the possibility. They're takers. They're takers. Right. They don't contribute. I mean, this is so different than the characterization at times the president has said. And so let's just remind people, in case they missed it, what John Kelly said about DACA.
There are 690,000 official DACA registrants, and the president sent over what amounts to be 2.5 times that number to 1.8 million. The difference between 690 and 1.8 million were the people that some would say were too afraid to sign up, others would say were too lazy to get off their asses, but they didn't sign up.
So that million discrepancy, they might just be sitting on their asses on their sofas eating bonbons, and they just forgot to sign up. If your chief of staff feels that way, no wonder it's hard to get a deal for Dreamers from the White House.
One of the things that I think has been confusing to advocates of a deal for, at least for the DACA recipient pool of Dreamers and then for the broader pool, is that Kelly has appeared to be on various sides of this issue at various times. John Kelly, in certain ways, is not unlike his boss. And one of the ways we have seen certainly is rhetoric. The other is in saying different things to different people depending on who he is with. There's no question that if he has wanted a deal related to DACA at various points, it's because this was an obstacle to other things, and this was just basically checking a box to get rid of a problem, not because he felt some emotional connection to this issue. The president, to your point, actually, I think, has expressed more of an emotional connection when he is not saying other things on Twitter.
Right, except that he is the starkest thing I've seen from the president on this totally comports with what Kelly's saying.
Sure.
I don't know how he has forgotten his own lineage. No Irish need apply. You know, when my grandparents came here, I know for a fact they didn't know there was a legal process. They just wanted to come. That's why they were so willing to have their names changed and do anything they could. They were afraid. They wanted to get in. They weren't lazy. That's for damn sure. But the president said bill of love. He never meant it. You heard what he said about dreamers. Don't buy that dreamers stuff. Oh, all Americans are dreamers.
Right.
He wants to make them an us versus them. That's where they are on it. How they come out on it, we'll see. But that's clearly their policy take on this. It's us versus them.
It's certainly their policy. There's no question about that. Look, I mean, the president, to your point, has been all over the place on various issues. I think he actually genuinely has been looking for a way out of a situation that the administration got him into. To be clear, yes, it was under threat of lawsuits from attorneys general in certain states, but there had to be a deadline to end DACA. There is some question as to whether the administration was secretly working with those AGs to force this issue in the first place and to force the president's hand. But he has been looking for a way out of this for a while. But to your point, every time when there is an answer that they could come up with, they always go back to the more nationalist, nativist policy. And this is no exception. And again, for people who thought that John Kelly was going to be, you know, a moderate force on this issue.
Right.
That is not who he's been.
Okay, next topic, the president and whether or not he will sit down with Robert Mueller. Our CNN reporting is that the president continues to say he wants to sit down.
Oh, he's very angry at our story yesterday.
He was?
According to several people, yes.
He was angry that the lawyers don't think that he's going to. Or
he was just angry that it publicly appeared, and because, as we know, he tends to go in the opposite direction of what people think he should do.
A little bit of bravado. I'm surprised he didn't respond to Biden yet. Because I felt that Biden was punking him a little bit about how they won't let you. They'll tell you not to.
And it's a good idea. They're right. There was a thing about how, you know, he wouldn't let him do it either. He shouldn't go do that. I think that the president is of the belief that he can talk himself out of most situations, and he repeatedly says there's nothing there. So going forward and doing that is a problem. And to be clear, I think Biden had something right in his interview with you, which is that it isn't just that his lawyers are afraid that he might prevaricate. It's that they're afraid that he will unintentionally get himself into a situation because he is, you know, to be generous, imprecise, because he sometimes relies on hyperbole, often relies on hyperbole. It isn't necessarily because here's this thing that he's covering up. It's he might just steer himself down a bad course.
And he's going to be sitting down with a group of men and women, in all likelihood, who he has disparaged, disrespected.
That's right.
So he's putting a lot of strain on their game in terms of staying fair.
Correct.
Do you like that phrase also?
That was good. We should use that again.
Let's do that.
Did you make that one up too?
Make them all up.
Make them all up. Maggie, thank you. Great to have you here. All right, so a group of senators coming to the defense of the FBI. They have a message for the White House before the president decides if that Democratic rebuttal should be declassified and made public.
Plus, former Vice President Joe Biden weighing in on the Dreamers debate. Listen to this.
Either do it or don't do it. But don't bargain their lives for a wall or for funding for a program. That is not the American way.
That's exactly what the Democrats are in a position to do right now. So what deal does he think the Democrats should make? Next.
New Day, brought to you by Jared, the Galleria of Jewelry, turning feelings into jewelry. That's why he's...
Former Vice President Joe Biden says he is outraged by the ongoing battle over the Dreamers. The former Vice President says their lives should not be used as a bargaining chip in exchange for Trump's border wall. But what deal does he think the Democrats should make? Here's part 2 of the interview. DACA obviously matters, the executive order that came through under your administration with President Obama. Do you think the Democrats should do a deal, save the Dreamers, give them the pathway that the president offered, we'll give you the wall? Would you do that deal?
It depends on what they meant by the wall, but one of the things that...
He's going to want to say wall at the end of it.
I don't care what Telly says. That'd be fine by me, but here's the point. the idea we're using almost 2 million young lives. These kids are Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine 2 years old? Mom, don't take me across the Rio Grande. I don't want to go. It's illegal. Leave me here.
Rule of law, Vice President.
Oh,
That's what they say.
It's just, rule of law is a rule of equity. And there's such things as equity. And there's no equity in sending 2 million kids who've been here, 1.9 million, for the bulk of their life, who didn't come voluntarily and have abided by the law and the rules and are making great contributions to America.
Or they can stay, but not their parents, and they can only be guest workers. They'll never be like you and me.
That's a gigantic mistake. It's a gigantic, look, we're the only country in the world, of the industrial world, that is able to have replacement workers, able to continue to grow. The rest of the world, I mean, we are so incredibly short-sighted. But here's the point. The American people have a heart. The American people overwhelmingly think the lives of these kids shouldn't be bargained for anything. You just do it. Either do it or don't do it. But don't bargain their lives for a wall or for funding for a program. That is not the American way.
So then do the Democrats stand strong on that kind of principle and not do this deal? And then you have to see if the president's willing to pull the trigger on his own self-imposed deadline? I mean, should the Democrats play it that way, the way you're saying it?
Well, I think the Democrats have to continue to make clear that this should not be a bargaining chip. This is inappropriate for use these kids' lives as a way to get more money for A, B, C, or D, or any particular thing.
But they sign on to the deal, Vice President.
But no, I know, and it's always, having served there for 36 years, I'm always reluctant to go inside and negotiate. As you know, every time we had a trouble up in the Congress, I was the guy that got sent up to do that.
That's why I'm asking you.
Well, I know a way I would have tried to negotiate it, but I'm not there. I'm outside. I'm not inside. I don't know where the elasticity is to make this. On the basic proposition that if you had a wall that provided us security that wasn't just an absolute waste of money, meaning national technical means to protect it, and all these kids had a path to citizenship, I'd be inclined to do that.
You'd give Trump the political victory in order to get the Dreamer deal done.
I don't care about his political victory. That's not how I view politics, whether or not it's a personal victory or not.
When you go to speak to the Democrats now, this is going to be a big deal. They have to figure out some very fundamental things. Being anti-Trump probably won't be enough. What is the challenge for your party?
The challenge is for us to step up and offer concrete answers, which we're doing. For example, when we talk about the plight of the working class, one of the plights is the cost of education, the cost of daycare, the cost of being able to care for your kid. And there's no reason in the world why we can't step up and have continuing education that's free. If you eliminated one single loophole called stepped-up basis, there's $1.34 trillion of loopholes out there for the wealthy and for others. If you just eliminated one that cost $17 billion, I could put every single qualified kid in America who qualifies into community college for free. Cutting the cost of four-year college in half, it costs $6 billion a year, and I can reduce the deficit by $11 billion because we're giving away $17 billion a year in a thing called step.
So an idea like that is a centrist idea. You've said before the Democrats have to think about how to get to the center and speak to the people that voted for President Trump. Your party is not moving to the center, Mr. Vice President. It's moving to the left.
Well, Chris, you know me well, and I don't want to correct you. My point is, I don't think you have to choose between your heart and your soul. If you go back and look at my record of 36 years in the Senate, I was rated one of the most liberal senators in the United States Senate that 36-year period. I am the guy that spoke out on same-sex marriage and a whole range of other things. I take a backseat to no one and being progressive. I found no distinction between being able to be progressive and worrying about working-class people. Middle-class people. They are not inconsistent. And to make the point, in the last campaign, I went to a factory up in Ohio, a Ford factory, and I started off and I said, let me tell you something. We have to elect children. And I went on and I said, here's the deal. Every woman's entitled to make the same pay a man makes for the same job. All these blue-collar guys went nuts. You know why? If their wife got paid the same for selling shoes, the man says selling shoes in the same place, they get to put 4 new tires on their car. They get to get a new faucet. They get to make sure they're able to pay their insurance. I said, look, it doesn't matter. It's none of your business who somebody marries. None of your business. They cheered. 3,000 guys cheered. Just don't tell them they have to live that lifestyle. It's anybody's. And any man who raises his hand to a woman is a coward. They went nuts because they got daughters and wives. We forget that these are the people I came from. Not just me, almost everybody. I mean, middle-class folks who are decent, honorable. And the thing that we have to do is we have to start looking at them and acknowledging and treating them with dignity. It's the job they do that we have to begin to honor. Anyway, it just drives me nuts.
It does drive him nuts. Now, will it drive him to run? That is a very separate proposition. And
what's the answer?
And you know what? We ask him, and I think where you have to get to it right now is he's not going to give you an answer right now, and it is too early. But he is not where he was emotionally. He'll never be the same. How could he be after losing his son on top of what he's lost already? But he's in a different place. And that's why...
That meaning a more open place?
He's never seen anything like Trump before.
Oh, so he's more motivated.
He's never been as concerned about it. You know, but he loves this poem that he and my father both used to quote all the time. Will hope and history rhyme for him, is the last line of this poem. Will be the right timing, will he be the right guy?
How old is Joe Biden?
He is in his 70s, as he likes to say. He would be like 77
I like that,
years old
it.
when he runs. You know, he'd be like 77 years old. Vitality, health, age is just a number, true. You and I tell ourselves that all the time. I mean, you're now 31 years old, you know.
Please, I try not to reveal
the
that.
The months is ticking off the clock. But he wants it. The question is how much. So here's a little taste of that.
How do you not run for president? How do you not? When it is in your heart, it's in your head, you don't think anybody out there is better than you, and you've never had a moment in history that called for leadership more. How do you not run?
Rhyme, like I usually like to.
That's a tease.
But I asked him it a little differently, and he wound up giving a different answer, which will be interesting to listen to. Will come up in the 8 o'clock hour.
Can't wait to watch it. Great interview. Okay, meanwhile, coming up, President Trump wants a military parade. Do members of Congress agree? We have a Democratic senator next.
Russian interference was real. They're coming back in 2018. We had this whole smear campaign discrediting honorable American institutions just to protect the president from the investigation. We have nothing being done legislatively to protect the 2018 elections.
All right, that was Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse leading a group of senators on the floor of the Senate last night who want President Trump to end what they call a smear campaign against the FBI and other things. So how did that effort go? Senator Sheldon Whitehouse joins us now. Good morning, Senator.
How are you, Allison?
I'm well. So listen, last night you did this. You were trying to get Republicans' attention, and I guess the White House attention. How did it go?
Well, I think we got a lot of people out there, and I think we made the point that this episode of the Trump administration and a group of Republican supporters attacking our own institutions doesn't help anybody except Vladimir Putin. In fact, it sort of follows his lead, as John McCain pointed out. And I think it's also up to us to start pointing out that the Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate have done virtually nothing to listen to the warnings of Trump's own administration officials saying the Russians are coming at us again in the 2018 elections.
Yeah.
Here are some things you ought to be doing about it. Let's get to work. Instead, we see the one thing that we've done, which is the sanctions on Putin and his oligarchs, which were passed by 98-2 in the Senate. This was not a partisan vote, being quashed over in the White House, sheltering Putin again. So this is not a good situation in any of those dimensions, and we've got to start moving beyond it, and we tried to bring some pressure on those points.
I do want to get to those sanctions in a moment, but you say that you were trying to make a point. Okay, I mean, I guess that's one goal, but are you winning any Republicans over to your side?
You know, that remains to be seen. I think that we have, for instance, bipartisan support for a couple of bills that would protect the special counsel. That would be a very helpful step forward. I hope that we can get Chairman Grassley to hold some hearings on some of the legislation that we want to look at. He did on the title bill, which has effects on the Putin regime's ability to meddle in American politics, because it would clamp down on the use of shell corporations, which are a known Russian corruption and political interference tool. So there are things that are going, but when you look at the 2018 elections rushing towards us, I don't sense the urgency, and we're trying to ramp up the urgency and make sure the Republicans know we see it as a priority.
Okay, so back to those sanctions. As you say, there was this bipartisan effort to impose them. They were supposed to be implemented. The White House decided not to. They missed that deadline for implementation.
So far.
Yeah, so far. So why? Why did they do that?
Well, that's a really good question, and we'd love to have answers to it. The White House has not provided an explanation. Clearly, this was an effort to provide a deterrent punch at the Putin administration in Russia by tangling with the thing he cares most about, which is himself and the oligarchs around him and the way they can use the West to hide their ill-gotten gains. That's where you really hurt the guy. And he deserves a punch after what he did in our 2016 elections. So you got the whole Senate essentially agreeing with that. It's inexplicable why the president would not go forward and pursue those sanctions.
You know,
there is no answer.
2 days before the
answer.
sanctions were supposed to be implemented, as you know, the CIA director, Mike Pompeo, met with two high-ranking senior Russian officials. Do you think there was a connection?
I do not know. I think that in his role as CIA director, Mike Pompeo is going to be meeting regularly with senior Russian intelligence officials. He should, as much as the Russians need and deserve a punch in the nose for what they did in the 2016 elections, and this sanction regime is the way to do that. We are also trying to work with them in other areas, and to have that continued dialogue, intelligence professional to intelligence professional, is not in and of itself a bad thing.
Do you want to see a military parade in Washington, D.C. for President Trump?
You know, I don't think it's a good look for us. I think a lot of the world remembers the Soviet May Day parades, and they still see the North Korean military parades around Pyongyang. I think a better look for us is a free, open and diverse democracy in which everybody gets their say.
Are you worried about the cost? I mean, have you gone that far in your thinking about this military parade? Because President Trump does seem quite interested in it, so much so that the reporting is that Secretary Mattis is starting to try to figure out how to do this. Are you worried about the cost, given that there are budget battles going on?
We haven't seen a budget proposal for it yet.
Would you agree to give millions of dollars to this?
Like I said, I don't think it's a good look for our country. I think, you know, when John Winthrop, 4 centuries ago nearly, said that America should be as a city on a hill with all the world's eyes upon it, I think when the world's eyes look at our city on a hill and they see an echo of Soviet May Day parades and North Korean military parades, that's not the best image for us. I think a vibrant and lively democracy is the best image out to the world, and I think that's what we represent to the world when we're at our best.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Chris.
John Winthrop reference. Strong. SpaceX successfully launching the world's most powerful rocket. Talk about strong. The incredible moment that took place here on Earth and what's going on right now in space.
They're driving a Tesla.
Some Vice President Mike Pence says the U.S. is poised to announce the toughest economic sanctions ever against North Korea. The Vice President says the U.S. will continue to isolate the North until they abandon their nuclear program. Pence right now is in Tokyo. He's meeting with Japan's Prime Minister Abe before heading to South Korea to lead the U.S. delegation at the opening ceremony for the Winter Olympics.
Steve Wynn resigning as CEO of Wynn Resorts amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Wynn has denied the detailed accusations laid out in a Wall Street Journal investigation that cited dozens of sources. But in a statement, Wynn said he cannot continue to be effective as CEO while facing these allegations. Wynn recently resigned from his position as finance chair of the RNC.
Have they given back the money that he raised for them? That's a key question. No answer yet. SpaceX celebrating the successful launch of the world's most powerful rocket. The company's Falcon Heavy blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. No hitches. Then, for the first time ever, SpaceX guided 2 first-stage rocket boosters back to Earth, and they landed upright on the pad. No small feat. And that's not all. CEO Elon Musk put his own personal roadster on top of the rocket as a test payload, complete with a dummy in a spacesuit at the wheel.
Won't he miss his car? I mean, why did he do that?
Well, I think he can get another one.
You
The
do?
sign on the screen says, "Don't panic." The plan was to shoot the car into Mars orbit. The rocket was so powerful, it overshot that orbit, sending the car toward an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Inside the car, David Bowie's Space Oddity is playing on a loop.
Fitting. So do we think that this will get Martians' attention? I do.
Maybe.
I do.
Maybe.
Some Martian is going to be driving around in that Tesla soon.
I mean, look,
Mark my
there is
words.
an odd arrogance to assume that we are the only ones out there anywhere.
I agree.
So who knows? Who knows what's up there? Now, you know, when they use this same rocket, this is the one they're going to use to send people to Mars. I mean, they got to get it right because now that poor car is in some asteroid.
Floating around Jupiter. Yeah, we don't want that.
Who signs up for that trip? Because it's going to be a very long trip.
How long?
Years.
I'm out.
No, you can't go. You got kids.
Yeah.
But I wonder who goes. I mean, because you may not come back, by the way.
Right. I
This car is going towards an asteroid belt, and he loved that car.
I know. I'm not sure he should have sent that. But anyway, it's time for CNN Money Now. How it has been a roller coaster ride, okay? It's been like shooting a Tesla into orbit for Christine Romans, and we're less than 2 hours now from the opening.
Like a welcome respite yesterday to not watch the stock market and watch that instead, right? Because anything could happen this morning, you guys. Anything. Markets around the world are adjusting to a new reality. The era of low interest rates is over. U.S. stocks yesterday tanked, then roared back for a huge gain. And then overnight, guys, the anxiety has returned. Some Asian markets fell. U.S. futures have turned lower. Dow futures tumbling more than 200 points at one point. Europe a little bit higher, but again, everything in flux here. Yesterday was remarkable. The Dow swinging over a trading range of 1,200 points, changing direction 29 times before closing up 567 points, or more than 2%. Both the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 also closed higher. A few things going on here. Rumblings in the bond market, concerns about wage inflation. Wage inflation is great for workers, but bad for corporate profits. And if it picks up too quickly, the Federal Reserve may need to raise interest rates faster than planned, and that's bad for an almost 9-year-old bull market. So wild swings are back on Wall Street. Wall Street's fear gauge fell a bit. That's good. After surging 115% on Monday. That was bad. But remember, stocks are not the economy. Even if stocks drop again today, and it looks like they will, maybe even a few hundred points on the open, conditions are still good. The economy is strong, the job market is robust, and corporate earnings, you guys, are rising. Chris?
But as we know, that's a big game down there on Wall Street where your friends are. We know that they're gambling most of the time. Christine Romans? She hates it. She hates
I know she does. I know that.
All right, so we've been talking a lot about the Dreamers, but we haven't been spending as much time talking to them. That's about to change. Look at what they've been called: illegals, murderers, gangbangers, now lazy, sitting on their asses. That's what the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly said, very controversial. We're going to talk to somebody who is a DACA recipient. How do they feel about it?
The difference between 690 and 1.8 million were the people that some would say were too afraid to sign up, others would say were too lazy to get off their asses, but they didn't sign up.
That was White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. He's now facing backlash over those controversial comments. Sources tell CNN the Democratic lawmakers confronted Kelly about them. But what does all of this do to negotiating, and how do Dreamers feel about it? Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez and Gresa Martinez Rosas. She is a DACA recipient and the advocacy director for United We Dream, a group working to protect Dreamers. Great to see both of you this morning.
Thank you, Anderson.
Congressman, what did you think of John Kelly's comments?
Well, you know, he's really demonstrated a lack of understanding of the complexity of the legislation and the public policy. So I've learned that about him. But I didn't think it came with, you know, a lack of love and of warmth.
You
right? And
did not think it did?
I didn't think so, because many times what I have seen, Allison, that you could make up for the lack of understanding of the public policy if you have love, right? If you don't have a lack of love, if you don't have a lack of empathy.
But does John Kelly have that love and empathy or not?
He doesn't. That's my point. So I knew, like the last time I talked to him and we were talking about temporary protective status, he said, "Oh, Luis, we just got to figure out who the dead ones are and weed them out." And I was like, "You know, Mr. Kelly," I didn't say it, but I said, "Mr. Kelly, you got to sign up every year." And then he said, "You know, we'll do criminal background checks." I said, "They go through criminal background checks every year." So he didn't have an understanding of the policy. I knew that, but he didn't think he had a lack of love. And he demonstrated that because his boss says that they're all criminals, basically, and now he's saying they're all lazy. And so, God, it's really a sad situation because he was supposed to be the adult in the room. He's supposed to be that guiding, mitigating force, and he's not.
So Chris, what did you hear when he said that?
I heard a bully. Someone that is picking on people that are afraid, that are scared, that are younger than him and smaller than him, and using the White House as a bully pulpit and to hurt people. And so, you know, I think one thing that he said was right, though, is the fact that we are afraid. We're afraid because there's a 10-year-old girl, Rosa Maria from Texas, that was pulled from her hospital bed and into a detention center just because she was undocumented. We are afraid because we have given the government our information, our address, the places where our moms and our dads live, and now with this administration we're afraid that they're going to come after us. So, you know, he's a bully, and to him I say, you know, stop. Bullies, stop whenever you stand up to them. And my message to General Kelly right now is, you made this crisis happen. You can fix it right now. Stop using bullying words and make sure that you get to work.
So, Grace, but just to be clear, for the million people that he was referring to that have not signed up for DACA, why haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that United We Dream did a survey and they found out exactly why. The costs are too high, and we don't want to put our families at risk of ICE agents coming to our home addresses.
So you were scared, and the cost is what, $500 for the application?
$500 every 2 years for young people that are just trying to make ends meet and go to college and and help their parents. And so that is the statistics that we know. And so anything outside of that is just people using bullying and, frankly,
because I mean, you're on the front lines of this. You deal with dreamers every day. Do you know any who are too lazy to get off their asses?
I know a lot that are like my little sister that just applied for DACA, and she saved all of her money and did babysitting jobs to make sure that she was able to pay for it. I know that young people all across the country have been taking time away from home and here in Washington, D.C. to fight for the DREAM Act, and we're not going to stop until we get permanent protection.
And it demonstrates, Allison, again, the Chief of Staff's lack of understanding of the policy. Remember, DACA is an executive order, so it's constrained, right, and limited. That's what the lawyers did. The DREAM Act is very, very ample, right? It includes more people because the ages and the qualifications.
Okay.
That's why we want to go to the DREAM Act. Again, Mr. Kelly says, oh, they can't, they didn't sign up. I'm offering you 1.8 million people. Under the DREAM Act that I proposed to the Congress of the United States, it's 2.1 million people. So it's really about who qualifies and how you draft the legislation, how full is the legislation, and the ability for people to sign up. Again, he demonstrates a lack of understanding.
Let's talk about that legislation, because as you know, we're up against yet another government shutdown tomorrow night at midnight. And so what the House plan is for the budget and continuing resolution and what the Senate plan is, neither one address the dreamers. So where are you on that, Congressman?
Look, here's where I'm at. There's a couple of words. You know, it's like in Spanish, Democrats are always using the word tomorrow, mañana. They got that word down when it comes to our immigrant community. But you know what? Republicans, nunca, never, never. And between Democrats saying mañana and the Republicans saying never, we just don't get to a place that's fair. So they want to describe Gracia as some of this dark horde menacing to America. And I wanted to come on this program to say, I see a fellow American in her. I see a future congresswoman. And you know what? That scares the living daylights out of them. But I think that's representative of the future of America.
Okay, so what do you want the president to know?
I want him to know that we're not backing down, and I want the American public to know that immigrant young people are fighting for our democracy, and we're fighting to make sure that each and every one of us is safe, and we're not going to slow down. We are not going to ensure that our families are put in danger for a protection that would only benefit us. And so to the American public, we shall overcome this moment, and then we are better than this.